Hello, everyone. This is Sergio Marrero here at Rebel One Live with Miles Dotson. He's a managing partner of Devland, that is an investor and also a startup studio out of the San Francisco area. Thanks for joining us, Miles.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, no, glad. And I heard Miles speak on GSSN. For those that don't know, it's a global startup studio network. He talked a little bit more about his unique approach to innovating. So I'm excited to dive into that. But I'll share a little bit of his background. He's a graduate of University of Rochester and University of Miami, mentor at several accelerators and incubator spaces, including the Berkeley Blockchain Accelerator and Zoo Labs. Also an investor and also a TechStars graduate from TechStars Seattle 2009 of the tribal team. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to dig in and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and if you could share with the audience, what is Deadland?
Sure. We are a startup studio focused primarily on R&D and innovation on frontier technologies. And our two primary focus areas are what we perceive as the next infrastructure, whether it be utilities, mobility and transportation and telecom, or on the opposite end, the future of connected everything. So technologies like IoT and AI and robotics, the things that connect our life and will ultimately change and influence how how we interact with each other as a society.
Great. And when you say exponential technologies, what do you mean by that?
Really just like this idea of, we're reaching a cusp of our current technologies and really focus highly on developing new trends and getting into spaces that we haven't been in before. One primarily that we're working around is like the 1,000-mile plus battery, right? That's a inevitable future for us, but it has downstream effects for all types of battery technology. So things like that. It doesn't have a single use. There's the function of the technology itself spills over into all the different applications of our life.
Got it. And when you think about like you're an investor, right? And but also a builder. Can you share a little bit more of like how does your I know a startup studio for well, I'll take a step back and let you share. Like how is the startup studio different than a regular venture capital fund for those that don't know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that we found ourselves to be readily equipped as operators, as previous executives or management level people. We ran divisions, we launched new products from zero. And we felt that the biggest contribution to this like growing, I would say growing audience of folks calling us, asking us for help in building their startups was to help them from an operations standpoint and also to catalyze early proof points while they're building new ventures or new products. The startup studio as a model is canvassing really the idea of business creation. But beyond that, the aspects of building the venture, IP development, and a catalog that can be created around that, but also evolving and maturing the entrepreneur and helping them to really get acclimated to this world if they don't have prior experience, or taking someone who's been in corporate and acclimating them more to what new venture is versus kind of the corporate paradigm of running business and kind of living on an older infrastructure.
Got it. So you find well. Here's a question. So entrepreneurs come to you, and at what stage are they at? Is it they come to you, you develop their business, and then they go off and launch? Is that accurate? Like at a high level?
Yeah, we have
Um,
a broad funnel. We work with everyone. Our primary focus has been around Gen 2 founders, so folks that are doing this the second time around, and they know the pitfalls and they're interested in doing it within the studio model. We've also tapped on a lot of the PhD postdoc audience to bring that applied research knowledge forward into venture. But our broader focus, just on a wide plane, is really helping to established frameworks that venture builders and entrepreneurs can use to get to early insights in what they're building, and really putting heavy emphasis on business as an interface, not business as like this monolith that you get stuck in. You know, a business is an interface to figure out what the audience needs and what how you can serve them, how you can meet those needs. So really digging in deeply on helping them to understand, like we're using software as a catalyst to dig deeper into that pocket of needs. We're using services to create retention and stay around in that equation. So helping them to understand the facets of business on an early stage, and they come to us typically at the idea formation stage. They're really early. They haven't seen revenue, and they're really trying to get off the ground with this new idea that they have.
Great. And how do they? I know you spoke a little bit before before we were talking that founders from San Francisco, but as well as Houston and Atlanta are working with you. How do they find you, or how do you find them?
For the longest time, it was grassroots. We, you know, as technologists and as previous entrepreneurs, we worked with a audience of folks. They would refer people to us. You know, I think my inbox and phone would constantly be blown up about software and building apps and, you know, launching companies in that sense. And over time, we developed a funnel to handle that inbound inquiry. There was always a question of, can you help me build my app? And our response was, you know, what's the business, what's the model behind this, and what are you trying to interface or exchange with this audience that you're building or growing? And so, frankly, we would speak at different conferences or host events, and by word of mouth, it started to grow, because for the most part, we've been stealth for a long time. So it's been organic and natural conversations to help us really find those most eager, most enthusiastic, and motivated entrepreneurs.
So are you investing primarily, do you invest capital as well, or you're primarily investing as, developing that product, the product for more somebody that has the concept or is more the business and sales person?
Well, I would say past that, we had more of a conscience around placing investments into businesses. But now as a studio, kind of in the co-foundry behavior, our interest is really in tapping into what are the futures behind an entrepreneur's output. So we call it, there's like a Zuckerberg theory, that if Mark Zuckerberg at year 2 would have broken out and started on another company, what would he have built? So we dig into a deeper form relationship with entrepreneurs and builders that can tap into multiple outcomes. So in our current form, that could be like the example of a standalone venture or a holding company. There's a few different models that we leverage internally to produce those type of outcomes.
Great. So, and can you walk us through the story of a project that from, can you talk about it, like how they first came to you and what you guys developed?
Sure. I'm not sure if I'll be able to talk in the realm of proprietary things, but I'll give you an example in the
Yep,
form of a
absolutely.
case study. I think a while back we had an entrepreneur program, which was a really key way of inbound funnel for us engaging with new folks. And there was an idea about building like a service integrated app for hair care for men. And typically the founder comes to us with kind of a present mind of like how they think they want to approach it. And we like to dig into that narrative, like to try to understand what's the background and what was the exciting impulse that drove them to want to do this thing. And then we reset them to 0. And we say, hey, okay, we got this audience that you want to serve. You got this kind of inference of how you might serve them. But let's see what is their need, or what is the continuum of needs that they may have, and try to understand deeply. You know, you have this opportunity to do something great and build something for this demographic or group of people. You know, what is the most effective thing we can do? And we have a few idioms that we exchanged here and there, but one is a paper airplane. Like, how do we take this from a paper airplane to a jet? And people underestimate the ingenuity and craftsmanship in a paper airplane, but building something simple that's tangible is the first evidence of what you're about to build. And also it's a confidence builder for the entrepreneur themselves. So we get them into the habit of this MVP iteration that will never get old and never dies. It's something that they will continue to do reiteratively over and over again. And through the process of that first cycle, we walk them through, how to interpret the product design, how to interpret the service model, how to interpret the audience and your relationship with them as a salesperson. Like, how are you going to tap into their needs? Well, you have to talk to them. You have to exchange value. You have to express the overall detail of what you're bringing to the table and hoping to acquire them as a customer at the earliest stage. And we found that for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's the biggest underestimation, is getting into something, focusing on the thing that is built as a product of that exchange versus on the exchange itself. Like, go get customers, use it as an excuse to understand and deepen the relationship, build an app to retain them, build services on top of the app to grow on that and build emphasis on that. So, we really, like in that one regard, we were able to walk the entrepreneur through that process with a patient approach and help them to sculpt out an opportunity that didn't necessarily look like what they came in with. But ultimately, it's a three-pronged approach. We want to focus on venture design. We want to focus on the founder themselves. We want to focus on the model design and make sure that all those things, as they're integrated together, are creating an impactful combination. And foremost, really understanding, is the idea that came or was a present thought for this founder the thing that they're best aligned to? Because in a lot of cases they're not. And part of that, and part of building as an entrepreneur, is understanding when you're creating something that you're not necessarily best suited to lead or run. And that's like that first step of understanding, like, hey, I'm a launcher, but maybe I'm not an operator, or I'm an operator and maybe I'm not a launcher. I need to find somebody to team up with that fills the gap of these verticals as we push this thing along the road.
No, I like the focus on really curating a number of individuals from the beginning, and then you're basically coaching them through the startup journey.
Yeah.
What before I'm sure we could go deeper. Would love to go deeper into the startup studio model for those that aren't aware. Rapidly launching ventures. Why we normally have venture capitalists that are just investing in ventures, but this is another way of investing. If you have a shop where what starts out as a development shop ends up being a way to you have an inbound funnel of ideas, and then you could curate the most promising and build those with those entrepreneurs. So it's a definitely a promising
Yeah.
a way to go. Can you share a little bit more? You were talk about an iOS engineer out of the Miami Fort Lauderdale area, and then now you are focusing on Devland, being an investor in San Francisco. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about your journey?
Yeah, for sure. I studied audio electrical engineering at University of Miami. So I had deep touches in the music industry. I was building and developing concepts for audio electronics. It was post-recession, which was the most like difficult job market in terms of getting up and getting going for a college grad. And I was kind of at a bridge. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I really liked the music industry. I liked the idea of somehow finding a pathway with the technology I was working with, and working random studio jobs, as well as trying to figure out my career path. And I had the fortune of having a mother that was an entrepreneur that kind of had her own path and was kind of a person of first. And she was really an influence in me kind of stepping out of that equation, going back home to Houston where I grew up, and getting into consulting. And I got an opportunity to work with a firm early that my predecessor there was somebody who graduated from University of Miami with the same degree I had. So there was a validation there. It was almost like, this person with an electrical engineering degree with audio applications is like somebody that can, figure out stuff. It's a process-oriented thinker that could figure it out. I quickly went from that into like being sought after as a technology thinker in every single sense of the word. And I ended up in a really early stage, like oil and gas services firm that had a technology arm. And we were acquired by a private equity company. And I was called upon again in the same sense to lead a segment of the technology that we were bringing forth to different clients. And through the process of just being a outspoken person, a thinker, a idea proposer, I ended up in a really pivotal role in that company to help drive through new technologies as we interface with companies, and we're growing this company through M&A. So that led to opportunities for me to interface with the private equity company that had acquired us, and learn a little bit about what they did, and also assist in terms of helping them to gain insights on the market and companies we should be buying, how we should grow the company, how we should be developing technology. And over time, I developed the product management discipline within that company, which was later handed off to a CTO that I became really good friends and colleagues with, and kind of still work with to some degree today. So I kind of got a really like a really big push and move through kind of a corporate space. But one thing that was always present for me was two things. When I was an iOS engineer, I was in limbo at that point in time. And I had started a concept with a colleague that was a startup. And it was really difficult to find resources in Miami. It was like incredibly difficult to grow a startup. I remember.
Well, but yeah, go ahead, go ahead. I'll let you finish. I was gonna ask what made it difficult
Yeah, no,
to
I was
grow.
going to
Yeah.
tell. So
Okay.
there was somewhat of like a business incubator on campus at University of Miami, and we had gone to meet there several times. And I think I met with the provost, and he had recommended that we dig in and like go meet people there. But some of the advisors were actually business school students that had never started businesses. And I started my first business when I was 12 years old. So I found the first notion of like context is the most important thing when you're working with an entrepreneur. You can't be the person that's giving advice on this model with no experience on doing those things or breaking forth those concepts. So we weren't really able to access the idea of what a first check means to something that you're building at an early stage, or angel investors or venture capital. We were so nuanced that we didn't even know. And I went from that into my career and started to gain interface with that over time, and had this present like buzzing in my ear of friends, colleagues, and people from my school network that were calling me to get help with the thing that they were building, because they remember I tried to start something, and they were all jumping into this pathway as well. So by the time I had spent 7 or 8 years in this like corporate pattern, the innovation attitudes I had in corporate weren't really being yielded, because as a company ages, it kind of gets locked into the things that drives its revenue, and it's really hard to iterate and innovate outside of that pattern. So I would propose new products and new ideas, and it wasn't that the executives weren't thinking out of the box, it just wasn't in the realm of what the business was intending to do. And that's frankly how startups get created. So I had these two things happening at once, where people were looking for my help to build things, and I was looking to build things myself. And my partner in Devland, Devon, we developed a series of meetings where we would come together and talk about these ideas we wanted to launch. And I would say it's like 2015, 2016. A year goes by from a previous conversation. And we talk all the time, but we just didn't talk about this particular thing. Devon calls me and said, "Hey, I found us an investor." I said, "An investor for what?" Because I couldn't recall which individual idea he could be referring to, because we had incubated and worked on so many different prototypes. And he was saying for this concept that we were working on called To and From at the time. And immediately we just had this realization like, wow, this is a transition point for us. We figured out how to access investors, and Devon had also like kind of hedged his way into figuring out that space. And so we were immediately addressed with like, we have access to capital, but Devon pitched this company idea with no product design, nothing, no pitch deck, nothing. And we immediately thought about other entrepreneurs we knew about at that point in time that were further along than we were, and closer to a milestone. So I think we grabbed one that we were really interested in working with. We introduced them to the same a funder that we were talking to, and that became the initiation of Devland, as we like canvassed all of our resources around this first initial project to help them get to their milestone, and functionally building out the first emphasis of what Devlin would become later.
That's great. And then after you built that startup, is it now off and independent, or do you guys are still incubating that venture?
It became like a long-term play, and evolved over time, and really taught us about the patience of building certain concepts, especially when it comes to frontier technology. It became like its own thing over time. And immediately after that first, I would say that first pattern that we were running, it took off. There were a number of other entrepreneurs that reached out to us. We started working with people deeply and figuring out like this idea of incubating. And we really didn't know about the studio model at that stage with clarity. And we gained clarity over time. And we felt like, hey, we were already doing these things. These concepts were already true to us. Now we found a home in this studio model, and a network of people we can talk to, and we began to build at a much greater pace beyond that.
So how long is a startup with you, and how many startups are you launching a year?
It really depends on what category they fit into. For ones that have a market entry opportunity and revenue, it's about inside of 2 years that they're with us, and that we're working with them to functionally spin them out, or help them accelerate. In a frontier pattern, in some cases, it's like harvesting IP and developing over time and finding relationships to create another avenue for commercialization, which is licensing. So we have worked with over 22 companies to date, and it's been an interesting, a difficult, and rigorous process, because entrepreneurship is hard. It's hard as shit. And I tell people, this is what you're signing up for, but the enthusiasm is like how you can wake up every day, do the thing that you are most seeking to do, and be willing to see what outcomes are generated from it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that the difference in and can you share a little bit more? I mean, I know you mentioned before that I mean, you went to school in Miami. You grew up in Houston, I believe, but
Yep.
you said you're looking at entrepreneurs in Houston, Atlanta, and San Francisco. San Francisco makes sense given where you are.
Yep.
How did how did Houston and Atlanta come on the map for you all?
Yeah. So Devon and I are both, homebred, grew up in Houston, and we always had an affinity to see kind of that, the innovation and the luster of that innovation at NASA and the Space Center, and everything that this kind of the space industry helped create in Houston, as something that was really influential to young kids like us. I remember one of my good friends' moms was working for NASA at one point in time, on I think one of the Columbia missions, and it's just such like a visible and large component of our upbringing. And so we always wanted to like have an imprint there, have a touch with entrepreneurs, build innovative things, and bring that value to Houston. With Atlanta was the kind of the stomping ground of the first company that we had worked with. And we saw at that stage, about 4 or 5 years ago, like the impression that startup technology and the movement of startup technology could have in that market. And we saw Atlanta as a really key place to develop and build away from Silicon Valley in a way that brings clarity and focus to the entrepreneur. So it was like the perfect space for an entrepreneur to focus and build, and a perfect test market to bring ideas forth, and then go to New York and San Francisco and raise money and build a larger pattern once you kind of figured out what you were doing. So Atlanta ended up being a really big harvest bed for entrepreneurs that we were working with.
That's great. I love the difference the model, and when you are working, what are some things you're looking for
Mhm.
in an entrepreneur? Because not only it's not only the idea, right? You're like you said, there's an idea, and then there's the individual, and you're looking for some market validation of some sort. But when you're selecting projects, can you talk about the what are the marks they need to hit for you?
Yeah, for sure. We're interested in entrepreneurs that are not afraid to pivot. For the most part, we think that there's a huge opportunity around folks that can start with an idea and weather their way through to the successive opportunities that follow that. Understanding the secondary opportunities as you're carving out this initial idea. Someone who has an interface with business, understands the market that they're carving, and really shows himself at an early stage as an evolving expert, maybe not like a established expert in the space, but somebody who has like the scientific method like approach. And we know, with a shovel, if they keep digging, they'll find something. So really, those are like the two key components of what we see early stage in entrepreneurs we're working with. And we don't always validate it on having a previous track record and having built things in the past. It's really about how they adopt frameworks and how they can implement things into a process and see the benefits of them as outcomes.
Absolutely. And can you share a little bit more? Part of the reason for those watching, I think Hamet Watt was someone else who we brought on, who runs
Yeah.
a startup studio and also a fund. Miles is running a startup studio. Can you share more about what you see in the future of venture capital?
Yeah, for sure. Right now, a big correlate around early stage investing, early stage venture in the traditional model, whether it be family office or firms, a lot of their interests are moving up market. So their checks are getting larger, their emphasis on revenue in the business and what those markers are evolving. There's some new entries and new folks coming into investing in the early pattern as folks get more interested in angel investing. You have the Jobs Act and folks interested in crowdfunding type apparatuses to build business. So a lot of the space is changing from a financial product standpoint and from an investing standpoint. And we think that the gap, frankly, on the early stage uh, part of this puzzle is getting really wide, which I think adds to the emphasis that we don't always have the luxury to build things that are not operational or build things that don't fit into some type of framework or commercialization paradigm. So we think studios, as they fit into this space, aren't necessarily offsetting the existing players, but I would say adding a new flavor and adding new value as we generate very early validated concepts that generate revenue and traction in a pattern that you haven't previously seen from early stage venture investments or accelerators because of how closely we work with the entrepreneurs.
That's interesting. That's not something I've previously thought about. Where a founder that wouldn't get venture capital funding, they come to you, you
Mhm.
help them build. They wouldn't have gotten venture capital funding because they wouldn't have gotten along, but they wouldn't have existed either, right? So
Yeah.
you're talking about with the cost of experimentation decreasing and some of the work you're doing, that you're actually growing the market, right? You're accelerating you're increasing the number of overall entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, which is net positive for everyone,
Yeah.
which is exciting. Why do you? Yeah, well, can you share more about why does Miles care about this work?
For I would say for two reasons. I'm interested in building cool stuff. I want to build something that's disruptive that turns heads and changes minds. But also, I think that I believe in corporate innovation. And I've seen it from the inside out, where it's really not to the fault of the corporations themselves or why certain things don't innovate. They need a market of suppliers and companies that they can acquire and take in under their ranks and build new executives out of those patterns and build new players. And so I think that this is kind of just a farming, it's like the farm league of baseball, or like farming in the accent of what it truly means. You're bringing produce to the market, Like I think that this same concept is true in a lot of early stage players. We think that we have the biggest fire hose in terms of being able to pump out companies that meet the needs of both the corporate sphere and the market as a whole. And we have been really keen about making sure that we have established relationships with corporate entities as well as funders and early stage players to really build cohesion, um, and help us to really carve out the opportunities that are present that need a little bit more help to make happen.
Awesome. Taking a step back, I didn't. And diving into the corporate aspect.
Yeah.
Your how are you working with corporates? Are they your LPs? Like how does that work?
Currently, we're in a pattern of sourcing needs from corporate players. So, for the most part, they'll have like a system of business they're running, and there's some nuance there that they don't have bandwidth to address. So we're fostering channels for corporations to feed us some of the world's most difficult and pressing problems, to have a more patient and research enabled approach to navigate and come up with solutions that have an opportunity to be incubated into those companies, or grown in parallel with the interest of one day having them acquired or having their work leveraged as a service provider or license. So we think that there's an avenue there, definitely just based on the symptoms that we've seen in corporate.
Yeah, so you're almost like a matchmaker. You're here, and there are founders on one side, there are corporates expressing interest.
Yeah.
I would say traditional corporate venture capital ends up not being that. The investments end up not yielding great return, or compared to
Yeah.
compared to regular venture capital, because they're making incremental investments, or they're making investments that aren't the economics might not be great, but it's
Right.
strategic. They're doing it for the relationship or for the information. Um, and I like the what you're talking about is like you guys are independent of the corporate, so you're able
Yeah.
to really think about how you best solve that problem. So it's a unique vantage point.
Yeah, for sure. And as we say all the time, is like corporations are really good at running like big balance sheets, large budgets, and keeping things moving, but they don't necessarily always know how to build new things. And we think that these are specialized disciplines, that there are people who exist that know how to do both segments, and we want to create a better and more firm handoff between the ecosystems as we build companies that integrate into corporate or that stand alongside corporate and exist in the market. So there's a bit of like we talk about ecosystem a lot. We feel like that's just the nature of the ecosystem to have this present activity.
Great. And Miles, can you share with the audience what's next for Devland?
Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot I can't share. I get preyed on by friends as like the Fox to the Batman kind of scenario of having all this dark lab activity that's going on. But frankly, I would say there's a lot of disruption. We're working on things from everything from food to transportation, the telecom, different solutions along those lines. And we're really excited about the idea of just awakening a new population or new mass of entrepreneurs, specifically out of millennial generation and Gen Z, but as well, we got a lot of founders that range the age brackets, and they're just as hungry and just as eager to get out here and build something new. So we think it's a talent and skill and a muscle that everybody has, and we're willing to work with whoever, as long as you're willing to wake up every day and work on that thing until you reach that milestone. That's really the basis for us, and that's what we love to do.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Miles, for joining us today. And for those listening, this was Rebel One Live, and Miles Dotson, managing partner of Devland. So thanks again, Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Sergio.